Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your host, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. Well, I'm so excited to celebrate with you today, William Morris. Now, William, besides having a very famous name, is famous and celebrated in his own right in the world of astrology. He is a musician and a sound healer, and he uses sound and music as remedies within medical astrology. So I think we're going to have this incredibly illuminating conversation. And it is also William who is going to be at the upcoming Canadian Astrology Conference, which takes place the weekend of September 15 in the one and only Calgary, Alberta. I'm going to be there as MC, and you'll get to learn from William there as well. So we're about to have an amazing conversation. William, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be present with you, Nadiya, today and with the audience, and a true pleasure. And I'm grateful to be invited to speak at this conference on the things that I have tremendous passion about, which is vibratory frequencies, sound, and healing as it's informed by the astrological chart.
So let's jump in, because I know, first of all, I do want to say to everybody, both William and I have an academic background. We might have moments of nerding out here on camera, and that's okay. That's part of the fun. But let's start with, how do you understand the connection between sound and astrology?
There are so many connections. It starts with Pythagoras in the Western tradition. So we see these connections between the length of the planets in their cycles and what's called the music of the spheres. And there are three forms of this music, right? There's the musica mundanus, which is the mundane of the world, the vibratory frequencies of the world. And then in the instruments, instrumentalis, and the production of sound frequencies using tools, and then humanus, within the human. So we're looking at using these tools to generate a coherence between cosmos and the individual. Part of how that's achieved is in what's called a post-Kepler view. So Kepler was a famous astronomer, right? But he was also a practicing astrologer. And as were many of the scientists practicing astronomy, also astrologers, and funding their astronomical work that way. But for us, we take the average speed of the planet and multiply it up into the audible frequency range, and that becomes a frequency that we use in a room with people. Now, these frequencies can be used as a fork that's struck and then placed on the body to generate frequencies through the body through direct contact, or what we do for sound healing ceremonies a week in our sound healing temple here in eastern British Columbia, central. And so people go through an hour-long journey with that process, where we take the chart, a calculation of the sky for the moment of the journey, and we take the most precise aspects, preferably within minutes of making some connection. And the angles are just exact. And those are the ones that we use for the journeys. Based on this principle, if we can get strong coherence between self and cosmos, that natural healing just unfolds.
Wow. So you can use sound frequencies for people to understand those very precise alignments in their astrology chart, and where a need for balance is there, you can choose a frequency for balance, and where a need for emphasis is there, you can use a frequency for that as well. Am I understanding this correctly?
That's correct. And we might use the natal chart, the nativity, to understand what frequencies to select and where to place them on the body relative to the constitution, the fundamental nature of the individual. Or we can use the onset of some form of a condition that they're dealing with in life, and use it to match that. It's kind of like homeopathy, where you get this matching, and then there's these resonances, and the body heals itself, and the life begins to unfold in new and beautiful ways.
I'm going to be selfish here for just a moment, and I hope the audience will forgive me. My most precise alignment is my Sun square Uranus. It is like pretty much exact, like to the minute exact alignment. I think it's off by 1 minute. And so I'm thinking, when I think of what sound that might be, I don't know, it sounds like something that doesn't sound harmonious. Am I right?
Okay, so that's right, and indeed it's so, and that's going to it's going to create those when they don't quite match, they're not sonorous and beautifully harmonious. They create beat frequencies, and those beat frequencies are operate to move and break up stagnations. So that Sun Uranus breaks up stagnations, but we usually use three, triplet. So we'd want to look for another planet which is in that configuration very tightly as well. And but yes, that would be certainly an option, because that theme is going to be present for you throughout your life in almost every scenario. You get to be a pattern disruptor and bring about new enlightened states of consciousness in yourself and others. And so while it might not be pretty, but there's always a resolution. And the thing is even when they're very close to each other and they get these beats going on, that's the binaural system. So it doesn't take much to drop down into these very deep states of consciousness with those kinds of frequencies.
And so this is medicine. This can be used as medicine when somebody is not maybe accessing that energy. Like when I was very young, I remember as a teenager, oh boy, was I ever so rebellious. I mean, I think back now and I think my poor parents, they just didn't know what to do. They just couldn't do anything right. I was just such a rebel without a clue. That's the kind of rebel I was. But maybe if I had the right sounds, it could have helped to calm things down. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, here you are now, I mean, that Sun Uranus is, that's part of your contract with life, right? Mm-hmm. And so it becomes the process of becoming, right? And your process of individuation. Maybe healing's not always comfortable. It can be quite intense at times. With sound healing, usually, and painful. So, but the thing is, in a sound healing journey, usually that vibratory frequency will get played, and then it gets moved into something that resolves. And so it's a constant play. It's just like the ocean, being in the ocean, where usually we're going to do it with sounds that come in very gradually and depart gradually. So it feels like you're in outer space, actually with the planets.
So it's a journey. It's a sound journey that people go on as part of restoring a sense of well-being through the use of astrology in their natal chart and sounds and music.
Right. And in the lecture, I'll be explaining how that's done and how people can do it for free, or they can purchase tools to do it if they like. There's stuff out there that people can get if they wish, that allow them to engage in this very profound healing process. So that process of vibration scales from very low frequencies, which is the oscillation of the planets, the oscillation of day and night. That's a particular rhythm. We have frequencies for those rhythms, the day, the month, the year. And if we look at conventional medical research, day, month, and year, there is a lot of material that explores the effect of those three rhythms on health. And so it's an intersectionality between conventional research methods and the astrological consideration. For instance, there's this hospital in New York. We've got over 1 million patients in this study where they're looking at the number of or patterns of disease for each month. And so
it's very powerful to consider, right? Because we know that there are studies that say more people give birth in a given month, or when it's a full moon, more people come in, for things like ODs and stuff like that, unfortunately. But that type of like very extreme emotional state tends to go up when there's a full moon. But it's interesting to consider how a larger pattern might be playing out when certain people are getting diagnosed more often for certain things or seeking treatment for certain things at different astrological moments or aspects or months as well, or maybe even just transits in their chart. It's fascinating to consider.
Absolutely. So the chart describes a pattern of tendencies that we have, and those transits or whatever means we have of projecting forward in time, and there's lots of them, of course, in astrology, they're used to understand when those patterns might unfold and become something to consider. And they also provide good information around prognosis, which is actually one of the great strengths of astrology.
You have mentioned stelliums. I know just before we started recording, which made me say, we got to start recording right now because we're talking about all this amazing stuff, but it's not getting recorded. So you said stelliums were stagnant energy. Can you talk about that a little bit? How do you understand them? Yeah.
Okay. So you have your chart, it comes up, person faces the south. Just as the emperor does in China. And if facing the south, the sun comes up on the left, it goes up to mid-sky and goes down on the right, right? And so, so the Bailey motions are like that. They all go like that in this clockwise motion as we face south. And so if there's a bunch of planets in a certain area, that part of the day can tend to be a little bit bumpy. There could be stagnations, what I call recursive patterns. These recurrent patterns are taking place, and those are forms of stagnation because they become habituated. So we can use frequencies, or you can use any agent: light, sound, warmth, cold, pressure, acupuncture, these kinds of things to move the herbs, homeopathy, to move the stagnations through those areas of congestion.
Do you think that when people listen to like just music, like a pop song, for example, is that a healing thing, a healing experience? I know a lot of people feel like they have had very healing experiences just listening to a song. I know I've been moved to tears listening to a song. But do you think like something like pop music can be a force of this type of sound healing as well? How do you see that?
Sure. Pop music, classical jazz, any music to which the classical Indian music, profoundly deepening, you know, the part of what brings the potency of that about is previous experiences. So when the sounds bring about recall, and the person resources some beautiful memory, that's going to be a profound healing moment. Or even if it wasn't as beautiful, it can also still be a profound healing moment. Now, that's a little bit different than some of the technicalities that we're discussing here relative to using the chart for an assessment and development of a treatment plan. That's a completely different conversation. And, but music moves the soul. You know, Ficino, who was a very, very famous astrologer in service to the Medicis, in translating their Platonic works and so forth, he claimed that the treatment of the soul was best accomplished, and he used astrology for the purposes of making these distinctions, but it was best accomplished using sound and music and or sense. That these were the two. They have a very strong and powerful connection into the limbic system, and the person can begin to reorganize their life at the interior in different ways.
So I love to give people something they can use, right? Something they can hold on to or practice right away. What's one thing that perhaps somebody could do right now or in their home where they can, for themselves, consciously become aware of how healing this sound quality is, or the connection between sound and astrology?
Absolutely. You know, in the late 70s, I studied in Santa Monica with a woman named Chava Lassoon. Now, she was a sound healer. And the way we worked is we would take any vowel, A, E, A, O, U, take your pick, And you place your hand on your body somewhere, and then you just send the sound to the area with that vowel tone, so that the hands and that part of the body are both vibrating. This is it's any healing process. Part of what it is that communication directs the consciousness of the being relative to their body, but their whole existence to this area, and the healing process begins to unfold. So that's singularly the most powerful. And once you're into that, then one could start improvising with consonants, ka, ka, ma, la, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da, ka, da, this kind of a thing. There's so many ways to do it.
It sounds like a religious practice. I know that there's this, just like with astrology, I think that you can't really separate astrology from religion. That just really happened very recently in human history I think maybe this can be debated, but from the discovery of Uranus in the later 1700s, that was really when we saw that divergence, which is why Kepler, you just couldn't be an astronomer without also being an astrologer, because there was such a integrated world view between the spiritual and the physical. Then that starts to separate at some point more recently in human history. And so it's interesting to consider with music as well, how it was such a domain of spiritual practice up until quite recently in human history. And I know so many spiritual traditions have this musical element, especially when you start connecting their mystical roots, and music comes into that as well. Have you contemplated what the larger meaning of that is, especially in terms of being a musician as well?
That's basically what I spend my time doing.
Yeah.
Yes. So I will use mantras, Vedic mantras or Hebraic. I'm not culturally bound, if you will. As a transdisciplinary, I use methods from many cultures, but they are what informs it at the root. And so, if you look at some of the sacred languages, those words all have power. So what we're doing with this process is adding the particular frequency to that, or a particular rhythm to that, in order to enhance it. Although we can say that the Vedic practices are really at the foundation of the conversation, and they are for me as well. So I will use mantras regularly. Aim, Rim, Klim, Chamandaya, Fiche, as a process of cleansing the sixth house in very, very deep and powerful ways.
And so you're the author of several books. Am I right? Do I remember this correctly? Yes.
Yes.
And so people can learn a lot more about the things that you're talking about here today. Now, once again, of course, William is going to be at the Canadian Astrology Conference, which takes place the weekend of September 15th in lovely Calgary, Alberta. You can join us online or you can join us in person. That's where you're going to see William give these live demonstrations. It's a very interactive talk that he's going to be giving. But if for some reason you can't come out or you can't join us online, we'd be very sad about that. But if you couldn't, can you talk a little bit about your books, how people can start to tap into this wisdom that you've shared through your books?
Sure. The book that I have is probably of most interest is called Cycles in Medical Astrology, and it deals with cycle-based phenomena, particularly the day, month, and year, how they're related to the health experience that we have, but also the movement, the daily motion, which has much of our daily experience. And much of this is also done in reference to the nodal axis of the moon. It becomes, in that book, the basis of the anatomy, with the dragon's head at the third eye and the dragon's tail at the root chakra. And this gives one a chakra-based system, and a way of understanding how different interventions might be employed. And the cycles also go, however, the opposite way. So that's the movement, the secondary, called secondary motion, where it's going through the signs. And that becomes something that's used as an evolutionary tool. And then lastly, turning to the next turn, it goes through the precession of the equinox of the great year, the 27,000 year great year. And that movement and the relationship of the soul to civilizational movements becomes something that can be considered at that level.
Yes. Each has a sound, each has its music, each has its way of tapping into sound to align yourself, to bring balance, to bring healing to your individual journey, but then also to our collective journey as well. You can participate in that by tapping into the power of sound.
Yes, that's true. It's true. The power of sound is profound.
It truly is.
Well, yeah. I left a 40-year practice of acupuncture where I was using sound. I focused now primarily on sound because that's the next book. It's called Sky and Meridian, but it deals with use of sound therapies into the meridian complexes of Chinese medicine, and so that's the next one. There's another book which is called Transformation: Treating Trauma with Acupuncture and Herbs, and it deals with the theories of Stanislav Grof and Richard Tarnas relative to the perinatal birth matrix from gestation to contraction to thrusting to exit, as they're related to the planets. Neptune for the gestational phase, Saturn for the contraction phase, and Pluto for the eruptive, cathartic, thrusting phase, and then the Uranus for the freedom represented by the exit. That experience is also dealt with in there, along with the theoretical backgrounds of the psychiatric movement around and psychological movements around the theories of birth experience as trauma. And I use that as a patterning that has a tendency to recur at different stage development. So we can look at that in terms of the Greek astrological methods of the 7 stages of human beings. Yes.
I told you guys that William and I were going to nerd out, and we kept our promise. I absolutely love the conversation. And once again, everybody, just to remind you, yes, the Canadian Astrology Conference is happening very soon, mid-September in Calgary, Alberta. Join us live or online. William, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed getting to know you.
Thank you, Nadiya. Thank you for taking time to do this. Fantastic. See you all there.
Yes, see you guys in Calgary, Alberta. And thank you, everybody out there, for watching. Until we connect again, take care. Bye.